I didn't see the room at first, only the light. Someone yanked off the blindfold and a cone of yellow fell across a metal desk. The air smelled like diesel and wet stone. I blinked hard. And there he was, the father from the truck sitting in a big chair like a judge. He folded his hands, studied me as if I were a map, and said in careful English I was wondering when you'd come. 2 days earlier, I had helped his family outrun a sandstorm. That's the knot of it. My name is Emily Hayes, U.S. Navy Intelligence, Montana-born daughter of a schoolteacher and a machinist. I know the feel of wheat stubble in September, the sound of a marching band on Friday nights, and burnt coffee at the VFW. I also know a desert sky when the wind starts to move the way the horizon browns and the radio tightens with weather. Rewind 48 hours. We were a joint team pushing a resupply route near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, the kind of no-name road that looks harmless on a satellite image, until the wind changes the map. Our convoy stuttered in the heat. Over the net, our liaison said a haboob was rolling in fast. Visibility collapses when that wall of sand hits. We spotted them at a bend, a rusted cart, a woman clutching a baby, 2 boys dragging the cart toward the lee of a low wall. The father, beard-trimmed close clothes, dusty but neat, kept glancing down the road like he expected something uglier than weather. I pointed to the bed of our truck. My partner Ruiz shot me a look that said, "You sure?" I answered with the shrug my mother used at church potlucks. "Do the right thing. We'll sort the rest out." We loaded them fast. The baby's lips were chalky. I dribbled water onto his tongue from a cap so he wouldn't choke. The older boy's hands were raw from pulling rope. The mother's eyes never left my face. The father climbed in last and sat opposite me, silent, steady. The truck shivered as the first fingers of sand ticked the metal like sleet. I yelled the plan: nearest checkpoint, then shelter. He didn't argue or plead. He just stared at me level and unblinking like a man measuring distance. When a storm speaks, it speaks in every language: hinges, squeal, canvas, snaps, engines, howl. Inside, that rattle memory gets loud. I thought of my dad's old Chevy on winter mornings, his breath making ghosts as he cranked the block heater. You don't leave folks in the ditch," he'd say. "You stop." He wasn't military, but he understood duty the way small towns do. The plow guy clears your driveway, you bring him chili. The church roof leaks, everybody shows up with hammers. We crawled on headlights and muscle memory. The checkpoint guard's scarf flapped like a flag. He saw the family, hesitated, then waved us through. Inside a concrete bunker, soldiers and civilians shared a dented kettle of tea. The mother wiped dust from the baby's ears. The boys fell asleep standing and folded onto a crate. The father stood with his hands behind his back, gaze steady as a plumb line. When the sand moved on, the silence felt like a bell had stopped ringing. Name Ruiz asked him in Pashto, then in Dari. He tapped his chest lightly. Rahim. Could have been true. Could have been safe. He pointed to the woman, Layla. To the boys, Sami, Haroon. His patience felt deliberate, as if he were translating us while we translated him. By sunset, the sky rinsed to a bruised blue. We walked them to the road where, for a minute, the air smelled like rain. Layla touched her fingers to her lips, and then to mine, a thank you that didn't need vocabulary. The boys tried to lift the cart at the same time and banged knuckles. They laughed the way boys do everywhere. Rahim waited until they moved on. He looked at me long enough for the moment to register as more than courtesy. Then he followed them into the pale light. 2 days after the storm, we took the same corridor, a smaller element sent to check a stalled fuel truck. The air was too clean. The first burst came from the ridge, the second from a culvert that had looked like shadow. We threw smoke and pushed for cover. I felt Ruiz grab my sleeve, heard him shout, and then the snap of something hard against the back of my helmet. After that, dust hands, a hood that smelled like old rope boots, thudding on packed earth, and the long, slow turn of time. In custody minutes pool, you count by the drip of a pipe, or the number of times a guard hums the same bar of a song. We were moved once along a corridor that echoed like a high school gym. My mind walked me home to Montana varnished floors at the VFW flags on Tuesday nights, lemon bars cut into perfect squares. That plain memory steadied my breath. They hauled me into the room with the metal desk. My wrists tingled from the zip ties. A guard stood behind my left shoulder, breathing like a metronome through cloth. Someone fumbled with the knot. The blindfold came off with a rip. And there he was. The same watchful eyes, the same centered stillness. Clean clothes, now a vest with stitched pockets, a ring that flashed when he lifted his hand. He wasn't the father of a storm-tossed family anymore. He was a man used to giving orders. He studied the bruise under my eye like a physician, then returned to my face. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, as if we'd agreed on a time and I was late for coffee. "My father used to say you can judge a person by what they do in the pause after hello." I stood very still in that pause, long enough to remember Layla's dust-lined lashes, the boy's scraped knuckles, the weight of the baby, and that tiny nod that had never meant thank you. It had meant we are not finished. The first thing I learned about captivity is that time gets sticky. It stretches, folds, and clings to you like the sweat under your vest. In that mountain compound, I lost track of the hour. We were given water in tin cups, bread that tasted of smoke. The guards avoided eye contact, as if looking at us would break the spell of control. Rahim, if that was still his name, visited only once a day. He never raised his voice. He'd ask questions that didn't sound like questions. Do Americans dream of deserts? Why save people who might kill you? I gave the same answers you'd expect from a Navy officer who'd been trained to keep words short and clean. Orders, protocol. We help civilians. But part of me felt the lie between the syllables. I hadn't acted from orders. I'd acted from instinct, the kind you learn back home when the neighbor's tractor won't start and you grab your tools anyway. One night the lights flickered. Somewhere outside, gunfire echoed like popcorn. A guard ran in shouting. Rahim's calm broke for the first time. He barked orders in Pashto, eyes sharp as wire. When he saw me watching, he gave a half smile. "You hear that? My enemies come for me, not you." He walked to the door, stopped, and turned back. "You helped my family, so you will live." Then he left me with the sound of the lock sliding shut. Hours later, 2 young men dragged in a wounded fighter, moaning, half dead. They dropped him near me, blood soaking through the canvas floor. I hesitated, training and mercy fighting for the same ground. Then I tore my sleeve, pressed it against the wound, and told him in the simplest English I knew, "Hold on." He gripped my wrist like he was holding onto the earth itself. When Rahim returned, he stared at us, me kneeling his soldier, breathing weakly, and something changed behind his eyes. He ordered supplies, brought in antiseptic gauze, a real cot. "You save life even here," he said quietly. "Even when it is mine." "I save whoever's bleeding," I said. He nodded slowly as if cataloging the answer. "There was once an American who spared my brother during the first invasion. He said, 'Mercy is never wasted.' I thought he was weak. Perhaps I was wrong." He left me with a lantern. In the yellow circle of light, I remembered my mother's words. "We don't do good for applause, Emily. We do it because it keeps us human." I clung to that sentence the way some people hold a rosary. The next morning, Rahim returned wearing a different expression, something between commander and confessor. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees. "You must understand," he said, "I have lost 2 sons to your drones." His tone wasn't accusation. It was arithmetic loss counted instead of lamented. "But when the sand came, you saw only a father." "I saw a family," I replied. He breathed through his nose, long and heavy. "If I let you go, my men will think me soft. If I keep you, I betray the moment we met. So you see, Commander Honor can trap us both." The way he said commander carried no sarcasm, only recognition. In that strange, underground calm, I almost pitied him. War builds walls between people who might have shared a fence once. A few days later, a radio crackled with news of negotiations, hostage exchanges. I didn't dare hope. Then Rahim entered again, carrying a folded piece of paper. "Right," he said. "Your base will want proof of life." I wrote my name, the date, and 1 line alive held east of the Kunar River. He read it, nodded, and slipped it into his vest. "Your kindness buys you a path, but do not think it erases blood." "I never do," I said. That night, the guards untied my hands, fed us lentils, and for the first time in days, the mountain air drifted in through a vent, cool and dry. I thought of Montana's night wind over wheat fields, how it smells of iron and grass. I held that scent in my head until sleep took me. In captivity, the hardest part isn't fear, it's stillness. You can survive terror. It passes like a wave. Stillness eats you grain by grain. I counted heartbeats, imagined the sound of church bells, tried to picture my father fixing an old tractor grease on his hands, radio humming classic country. Ordinary life became a kind of prayer. When dawn came, Rahim appeared with 2 trucks behind him. He spoke in short sentences to his men. One of them shoved a sack over my head again. "Quiet," the guard said. I heard engines start, felt the road change from stone to gravel to dirt. When the vehicle stopped, someone cut the zip tie at my wrists. "Walk forward," Rahim's voice said. I obeyed. The bag lifted. We were on a ridge overlooking a dry valley. A white flag Red Cross emblem flapped from a distant jeep. Between us, an expanse of dust. "You will go now," he said. "Tell them a storm can hide many things, even mercy." I met his eyes. "What about your family?" He looked toward the horizon. "They are safe, because you stopped." He gave a short nod to his men. One raised a hand toward the Red Cross jeep, signaling. I started walking, boots crunching on gravel. Behind me, engines revved, then faded into the mountain wind. No shots followed. Just silence. When I reached the medic, he asked the usual questions: name, rank, date of birth, and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. I stared back at the ridge where they'd disappeared. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the man I had saved was now the man who had spared me, and I couldn't decide which of us owed the other more. Back at the forward base, people didn't clap or cry when I walked in. They just looked up, nodded, and went back to work. That's the military way, relief disguised as routine. A medic checked my vitals, a captain asked 3 questions for his report, and the chaplain left a thermos of coffee beside my cot. No one asked about Rahim. Not directly. Still, his face stayed with me like a film burned into my retinas, that strange calm, the way he spoke about mercy, as if it were contraband. They flew me to Bagram the next morning. From the air, the mountains looked like they'd been hammered out of rusted iron. I stared down, thinking about his last words. A storm can hide many things, even mercy. 2 days later, I was debriefed in a beige room with a single fan that made more noise than wind. 2 men from intelligence asked their questions in measured tones. Did he identify himself? Did you cooperate in any way? Did you provide medical assistance to his men? When I told them the truth, that I'd saved a wounded fighter, the younger officer frowned. The older one, a colonel with gray eyebrows like eagle feathers, scribbled a note. He didn't look up. "Commander Hayes, he said you understand that assisting enemy combatants could be construed as collaboration." I nodded. "Understood. I did what I was trained to do, preserve life when possible." He set his pen down. "Even theirs, especially theirs," I said. He didn't reply. He just tapped his fingers once on the desk and said, "That'll be all." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That night, alarms tore through the base. Someone shouted incoming, and the floor trembled like a drum. I grabbed my vest and ran for the bunker. The sky outside was blood orange with tracer fire. Through the haze, I saw a plume of smoke rising from the north perimeter. We learned later it wasn't an enemy strike. It was a civil feud, one warlord turning on another. The fight came within a mile of our outpost. At dawn, I found myself on a convoy again, not as cargo this time, but as a liaison escorting an Afghan medic team to the nearby valley where civilians had been hit. Halfway there, a second explosion threw shrapnel across the road. We took cover behind a boulder. That's when I saw him again, Rahim. He was standing on a rise, shouting orders. His vest was torn, and his men were dragging wounded from the rubble, women and children. I couldn't believe it. The Taliban commander I'd met in that dim mountain room was now coordinating a rescue. He spotted me almost instantly. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he gestured toward the injured. It wasn't an order, it was a request. I motioned to my medic to follow. We worked side by side in the dust-wrapping bandages, hauling water-lifting bodies onto stretchers. At one point, a young girl's pulse flickered under my fingers. Rahim pressed a cloth against her wound, looked at me and said, Pressure here. I nodded. Got it. When the helicopters came, the roar washed everything else away. We loaded the injured first. I looked back toward Rahim, but he was gone. Just a swirl of dust where he'd stood. Later, while cleaning my gear, I found something tucked into the side pouch of my vest, a small scrap of paper sealed in plastic. On it, written in blocky English, "Mercy is not weakness. Tell them that." I didn't tell the colonel. I kept the note folded in my wallet next to an old photo of my parents outside our hardware store back in Montana. Months passed. The mission rotated out. I returned home, skin roughened by the desert and sleep still tuned to distant gunfire. My hometown looked smaller than memory, the kind of place where Main Street has one blinking light, and folks wave whether they know you or not. My father met me at the bus stop. He'd gone gray since I'd left, but his handshake still had that mechanic's grip. "They treat you all right?" he asked. "As right as war allows," I said. He nodded once as if that answered everything. At the VFW that weekend, old vets asked polite questions. "Where'd they send you this time? You ever see action?" But their eyes softened when I said Afghanistan. They knew. After the meeting, one of them, a Korean war medic, pressed a coin into my hand. "For doing the hard kind of fighting," he said. "The kind where you don't pull the trigger." I smiled, pocketed the coin, and drove home past the wheat fields. The sunset painted everything the same color as Afghan dust. That night I dreamed of Rahim's face again, not as an enemy, not even as a man I pitied, but as a mirror I wasn't ready to face. A week later, a package arrived from an APO address I didn't recognize. Inside was a worn Quran with a note tucked between the pages. "The boy you saved lives. He remembers the woman in the storm." No signature, no return address. I sat there on the porch for a long time, watching the wind ripple across the fields. I thought about the storm that had brought us together, how mercy once given doesn't vanish. It circulates like dust in the air, finding new ground to settle. That night, before turning in, I slipped the note inside my Bible. 2 books, 2 faiths, 1 message. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but I knew the story wasn't over. They called it debriefing, but it felt more like quiet exile. I wasn't court-martialed, not officially, but I was reassigned to desk work at the Pentagon. A reward wrapped in suspicion. They said I had compromised engagement protocol. Translation: I helped the wrong people survive. Washington, D.C. was the farthest thing from the desert marble and marble hearts, endless coffee cups, fluorescent ceilings. Every day I stared at satellite images of places I could still smell: Kunar, Helmand, Nuristan. Little red pins marking coordinates where people like Rahim lived and died. I filed reports, cross-checked names, drafted memos no one read. When I couldn't sleep, I'd walk along the Potomac. The water moved slow, honest, unbothered by politics. Some nights I'd imagine the sandstorm rising again, that brown wall swallowing sound, and wonder if I'd still stop for that family, knowing what it would cost me. Every time the answer was yes. 3 months into my reassignment, I got called upstairs. Rear Admiral Monroe, sharp as a winter morning, motioned for me to sit. "Commander Hayes, I've reviewed your file," she said. "You've seen the ground up close. That gives you a perspective we need unofficially." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside, photos of a ruined compound, a satellite shot of trucks lined in a canyon, a familiar face half obscured by a keffiyeh. Rahim. "Intelligence says he's been meeting with regional elders," Monroe said. "Not for attacks, for trade routes, schools negotiations. Off script for a Taliban commander. So what's the ask? Find out if it's real. But understand, this is off record. You go as an observer, not a soldier. If it goes bad, you were never there." That night, I stared at the orders until the letters blurred. They were sending me back to the place that nearly killed me. But something in me, maybe guilt, maybe unfinished duty, said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Back in Afghanistan, everything looked the same, but older. The air heavier, the checkpoints fewer. I wore civilian clothes, a headscarf, and carried no weapon, just a radio. My escort was a young interpreter named Farid, bright-eyed, barely 20. He reminded me of the boys from that storm. "You really knew him?" Farid asked as we bounced along a dirt road. "I did," I said. "And I don't know what that means anymore." We reached a valley lined with olive trees and bullet holes. A makeshift tent city stood where the mountains met the dust. Men with rifles watched silently as we approached. Rahim stepped out from a tent, older but still tall, still steady. His eyes found mine like he'd been waiting at a train station for years. "You came," he said. "You invited me." He smiled faintly. "No, Commander, I never invited you, but I knew you would come." Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of kerosene and tea. Maps littered a low table. Rahim poured from a metal pot and pushed a cup toward me. "You still drink it strong," he said. "You remember too much," I answered. He looked down at the map. "The war is dying, but men do not know how to live without it. I am trying to teach them." I studied his face. "Why me?" "Because you did not see an enemy in the storm. You saw people. They will listen to you because you wear the uniform of mercy." I laughed quietly. "That uniform got me grounded. Grounded men plant trees," he said. "You will help plant peace." Before I could respond, gunfire cracked outside, close, chaotic. The guards shouted. Rahim pushed me behind a crate. "Stay down." Through the flaps, I saw rival fighters storming the camp, their trucks marked with black flags. Rahim barked orders, returning fire. Then he turned to me. "Your people must not find me dead here," he said. "Take the jeep. Go. I'm not leaving you." His expression hardened. "Commander, this is my storm. You already gave me your mercy. Let me return it." Bullets ripped through the tent wall. One struck the lantern, sending flames crawling across fabric. I grabbed the map and Rahim's radio, then dragged Farid toward the vehicle. When we looked back, Rahim was standing in the doorway, rifle in hand, the fire lighting him like a statue carved from dusk. He shouted something, I think it was live. We drove until dawn. The road curved along a ridge where the world looked like ash and gold. My hands shook as I keyed the transmitter. "This is Commander Hayes," I said. "Mission compromised. Possible loss of contact. Request evac." A helicopter arrived hours later. The pilot, a woman from Texas with a grin like sunlight, yelled over the rotors, "You always pick the scenic routes, huh?" I smiled but didn't answer. Back at base, Monroe listened as I told her everything. When I finished, she said softly, "Officially, this mission never happened. Unofficially, you did the right thing." Then she slid the folder toward her shredder and hit the switch. A week later, a single parcel arrived at my quarters. Inside the map I'd taken from the burning tent, now laminated. Across the top, written in careful English, were 5 words, "A storm can hide mercy still." I folded it and placed it beside Rahim's earlier note in my wallet, 2 pieces of paper that weighed more than any medal I'd ever worn. That night I packed my duffel and signed my discharge papers. No ceremony, no salute. Just the quiet click of a pen ending one life and starting another. As I boarded the flight home, I looked out the window at the dunes below, shifting, alive, endless. Somewhere under that sand lay men who'd fought for different flags, but the same thing, a reason to believe they mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than war. When I stepped off the plane in Billings, Montana, the world seemed too still. No rotor blades, no radio chatter, no coded words about danger or extraction. Just the sound of wind over wheat and a baggage cart squeaking in circles. I drove my father's old Chevy home, the one he rebuilt after my mother passed. The cab smelled of oil pine air freshener and memories I wasn't ready to open. The farmhouse hadn't changed, paint peeling, flag out front, a rusted horseshoe nailed over the door. My father met me at the porch steps with a look that said everything words couldn't. He didn't salute. He just pulled me into a hug that felt like forgiveness. Inside the house was a museum of ordinary life. My childhood medals still hung by the hallway mirror. The kettle whistled. A calendar pinned to the fridge showed every day crossed off until my expected return, and then nothing. He'd stopped marking them after the day I went missing. "You look tired," he said. "I am," I answered, "but I'm here." He nodded, once poured coffee, and sat at the table like we were back in 1998 talking about high school football scores. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You did what you had to, Em. Your mother would have said the same. She would have told me to keep my head down and pray." "She'd say that too," he said with a faint smile. I spent the next few months trying to be a civilian. I fixed the fence, helped the neighbor harvest hay, volunteered at the Veterans Center on Main Street. But every quiet moment had an echo gunfire turned into thunder. Helicopter blades became ceiling fans, and the smell of diesel never quite left my skin. One morning, while helping an older Marine sort files at the center, I found a handwritten note slipped between two pamphlets. It read, "You don't come home from war, you rebuild it somewhere peaceful. No name, just that. I kept it." Maybe it was meant for everyone who walked through those doors. The center became my second mission. I helped organize support meetings for younger vets, the kind who'd served after me and didn't know what to do with the silence either. We called it Operation Stillwater. Our motto was simple: you're not broken just between battles. One night after everyone had left, a quiet man in a wheelchair rolled up to me. He said, "Ma'am, I was in Coast Province. You ever run across a commander named Darzi?" The name hit like static in my brain. "Rahim Darzi?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Heard he went rogue. Stopped fighting, started building. Crazy story." I swallowed hard. "Not crazy," I said softly. "Just rare." Later that week, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small brass coin, not American issue, but minted with Arabic script around the edge. In the center, engraved in English, "Mercy remembers." I turned it over and saw a faint fingerprint pressed into the metal, almost like it had been sealed by touch, not wax. No letter, no explanation. But I knew. That night I took the coin and the old Quran from my bookshelf, the one he'd sent years before, and set them side by side on the table. Next to them, my father's worn Bible. 3 books, 3 faiths, 1 story. I thought about Rahim's words in that mountain room, "Honor can trap us both." Back then I'd heard it as a warning. Now I heard it as truth. Because honor isn't the uniform or the medal. It's the choice you make when no one's watching, when the right thing looks like betrayal to the world. The next day, I got a call from Admiral Monroe. "Emily," she said, her voice softened by static. "There's talk of a veterans outreach program under State Department oversight, peace liaisons, humanitarian partnerships. They want someone who's seen both sides." "Both sides?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Someone who understands that mercy and strength aren't opposites." I looked out the window at the endless prairie grass bending in waves like sand dunes reborn. "I'll think about it," I said. "I figured you'd say that," Monroe replied. "You always think before you jump. That's why I trust you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the desert, Rahim's face in the firelight, his voice calm as the world burned. A storm can hide mercy still. Maybe this was what he meant. Not peace on paper, but peace in people. One act of mercy multiplied quietly until the noise of war runs out of breath. I made my decision the next morning. I called Monroe back. "Tell them yes," I said, "but I'm not going overseas. I'll start here, small towns, small voices, big silences. That's where the war still lives." She laughed gently. "Then start there, Commander. Just Emily now," I said. "No," she replied, "still Commander. Some titles are earned in ways medals can't record." I hung up and stepped outside. The sunrise painted the sky with the same amber hue as Afghan dust. I stood there breathing in the cold air that smelled of soil and promise. Sometimes the hardest battlefield isn't a desert halfway across the world, it's your own backyard where you learn to forgive yourself for surviving. It was early March when the letter came tucked inside the daily stack of bills and seed catalogs. The envelope was thin, stamped with a Red Cross emblem and a postmark from overseas. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another donation request, until I saw my name written in precise block letters, Commander Emily Hayes Rhett. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded 3 times and worn at the creases. "To the woman who gave my family shelter in the storm. You once told me mercy isn't weakness. I did not believe you then. But I do now. The valley you saved has a school for girls. We built it with the lumber from old barracks. My youngest Haroon paints the walls. My wife teaches reading. The children call it the House of the Wind. We still remember the woman who stopped the truck. A storm can destroy or cleanse you taught me the difference." Rahim Darzi. I read it twice before I could breathe. then again aloud because some words need a voice to make them real. The Montana sky outside my window stretched wide and pale blue, the same color I realized as the Afghan dawns I'd watched through dust. I thought about that day the family huddled in the storm, Rahim's stare, the baby's small hand clutching my sleeve. And suddenly the distance between our two worlds didn't feel so large. I called my father into the kitchen. He was sanding a wooden cross he'd been carving for the local chapel. I handed him the letter. He read slowly, lips moving just enough to catch the meaning. Then he looked up at me. "Guess mercy travels farther than bullets," he said. "Maybe it just rides the wind," I replied. He nodded, eyes soft. "You did good, Em. Real good." That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the eaves like it carried voices from somewhere ancient. I made tea and sat by the window reading Rahim's words again. I imagined that school, the laughter, the books, the walls painted by his son. Maybe some of those girls would grow up never knowing what a rifle sounds like. Maybe that was the real victory. A few days later I drove into town for groceries. The clerk at the feed store, an old army vet named Warren, waved me over. "Hey, Commander," he said, though I'd told him 100 times to drop the title. "You hear about that peace initiative the State Department's launching? They're looking for folks who've been boots on ground." "I've heard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'd be perfect for it," he said. "You got the patience of a saint and the stare of a drill sergeant." I laughed. "That's a dangerous combination." He chuckled. "Sometimes the right kind of dangerous is what peace needs." That night I sent an email to Admiral Monroe. "Ma'am, I've thought about your offer. If you still need a liaison for veterans and cross-border humanitarian programs, I'm ready to serve on American soil this time." She replied within an hour, "Welcome back to Active Compassion, Commander." The following week I started visiting community halls and high schools, speaking about mercy in war not as a slogan but as a survival skill. Some vets stayed after to talk. One young Marine asked, "Ma'am, does it ever stop haunting you?" I told him the truth. No, but it changes shape. One day you wake up and realize the ghosts have stopped whispering and started teaching. People expected stories about bravery explosions, near-death escapes. What they got were stories about holding a bleeding enemy's hand or a quiet nod between two people who should have killed each other but didn't. And to my surprise, they listened. Even the toughest old-timers at the VFW went silent when I read Rahim's letter aloud. After one event, an elderly woman approached me. Her husband had fought in Vietnam. She held my hand and said, "I lost him long before he died. He came home angry at the wrong things. You remind me what he was before the anger." That was the first time I cried in front of strangers since the war. Months passed. Operation Stillwater grew from one Montana town to 5, then 10. We helped veterans start gardens, repair homes, and mentor high school kids. Some nights after meetings, I'd drive out past the fields where the sky turns purple and the world feels endless. I'd whisper into the open air, "You were right, Rahim. Mercy's never wasted." Then one evening while preparing for a conference in D.C., I opened my email and saw an attachment from an address I didn't recognize. It was a photo. The House of the Wind. A modest schoolhouse painted sky blue standing in a valley between ridges I knew too well. In front of it, a group of smiling children holding handmade signs in English, "Thank you, Commander Hayes." I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. Then I printed it, framed it, and hung it on my wall beside my father's cross and my service ribbons. Sometimes I catch myself looking at it before dawn when the wind outside picks up and the wheat sways like a distant sea. And I think maybe this is how mercy works. It leaves one battlefield to build another kind of ground. The older I get, the more I realize that wars don't really end. They just go quiet and wait for the next generation to listen differently. It's been 5 years since the letter. 5 years since Rahim's words crossed half a world to reach this small farmhouse in Montana. In that time, the Veterans Program grew into something bigger than I ever imagined. Operation Stillwater now runs across a dozen states, teaching returning service members how to find purpose in rebuilding, not fighting. This morning I'm standing backstage at a community auditorium in Washington, D.C., my first trip back since I left the Pentagon. A row of folding chairs fills the hall packed with veterans, teachers, and kids in ROTC uniforms. On the screen behind the podium is the photo of that school in Coast, the House of the Wind. The kids' smiles haven't faded even through the faded pixels. Admiral Monroe is there too, sitting in the front row, older now, but still composed. When she catches my eye, she nods once as if to say, "Now it's your turn to pass it on." I step to the microphone. The lights are warm and the murmur quiets. I used to believe revenge was the only honest answer to betrayal. I begin. But I've learned that mercy, when you hold on to it long enough, starts to feel like strength. A few heads lift, others lean forward. I tell them about the storm, about the family on that road, about the man who stared instead of thanked. I describe the mountain room, the fire, the exchange, the years that followed. And finally I read Rahim's letter, his words steady as if the ink itself knew peace. When I finish, the room stays silent. Not out of pity, but respect. That kind of quiet carries weight, the kind that only Americans who've seen too much truly understand. Afterward, an older gentleman with a Vietnam service cap approaches. His hands tremble slightly as he shakes mine. "You gave him a chance to be human," he says. I nod. He gave it back. Outside, the evening air is soft, tinged with cherry blossoms and city dust. I walk toward the reflecting pool, watching the water ripple under the monuments. My reflection wavers, a mix of uniform memories and civilian peace. I sit on a bench and think of my father. He passed last year peacefully under the same sky he'd watched me come home to. Before he died, he left a note in his handwriting, shaky but sure. "You stopped for strangers. That's the kind of soldier your mother prayed for." I folded that note into my Bible right next to Rahim's letters. 2 men, 2 worlds, both reminding me that honor doesn't belong to sides, it belongs to choices. The wind rises over the water, carrying the faint echo of traffic and laughter from nearby streets. Somewhere, a bugle plays taps, and I realize that maybe every story, even one born in war, can end in music instead of gunfire. I take out my phone and open the latest photo from Coast, the school painted again, this time with a mural of a dove. Below it, a sign in both Pashto and English reads, "Mercy is the beginning of peace." For a moment, I imagine Rahim there, older, slower, watching his students run across the courtyard. Maybe he still remembers the woman in the truck, the storm that almost buried them both. Maybe he doesn't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he built something lasting from the ruin. And me, I've found a new kind of battlefield: classrooms, town halls, veteran centers, places where silence once lived, now filled with stories instead of gunfire. Sometimes when I speak, I see tears in the eyes of men who swore they'd forgotten how to cry. That's how I know the fight is still worth it. As the sun dips below the Capitol dome, I whisper a quiet prayer, not for victory but for understanding. May we all learn to stop for strangers. Then I stand, square my shoulders, and walk back toward the crowd gathering for the evening session. The air smells faintly of rain, not sand this time, but something cleaner. Before stepping inside, I look once more at the fading sky and say, half to myself, half to the wind, "A storm can hide mercy still." And somewhere far away, maybe across an ocean, maybe only in my memory, I hear his voice again, calm and certain. "I was wondering when you'd come." If this story touched your heart, take a moment tonight to reach out to a veteran, a neighbor, or even a stranger. Ask how they're doing. Listen longer than feels comfortable. Because sometimes mercy is the only language strong enough to end a war.